When it comes to identity, it's really about embracing all of it. And I think that, growing up, especially depending on where you are, who you are, your environment, sometimes it can feel very alienating when you don't have people who understand or look like you or feel like you and all the things. And so when I was growing up, being Afro-Panamanian was really hard. I didn't even know the term, first of all. And when I was in like communities, I wasn't like Black enough, I wasn't Latina enough. And so I struggled a lot.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Brand Behavior. I am your host, Juntae DeLane, and today we're diving into something that's completely reshaping how entrepreneurs position themselves in the market. It's building a personal brand alongside your business. In a world where customers connect with people even more than logos, the ability to develop an authentic personal brand while growing your business has been more crucial. And the data backs it up too. Entrepreneurs who develop strong personal brands alongside their companies are seeing higher engagement, stronger audience trust, and ultimately serious business growth. And today, we'll be unpacking the strategies, tools, and mindsets needed to craft these dual brand identities in a landscape that's increasingly shaped by social media content creation and the growing demand for authenticity. And I'm thrilled to be joined by two incredible guests that are doing some amazing work in this space. We have Marie Van Vick, who is an award-winning marketer and digital expert who's founded Power Brand Builder, and London Fashion Today. Marie is also the author of Building an Unforgettable Brand and has nearly a decade of experience in translating complex products into compelling brand narratives. And also joining us today, we have Ayanna Dutton-Diaz, co-founder of Non-Corporate Girls LLC. Ayanna brings incredible strategic marketing leadership from her work with giants like LinkedIn, Meta, Dentsu, Coach, and Cadillac. She's an Afro-Panamanian New Yorker with entrepreneurial mindsets that bridges both fashion and technology. Welcome to both of you. How are you, Maria? How are you, Ayanna?
Oh, good. Thanks for having me.
Yes,
Great,
excited to
great,
be here.
great. So we're covering both sides of well, that'd be both sides of the globe. No, you're Marie, you're in London, right? UK. And
Correct.
Ayanna, you're in New York?
I'm in New Jersey, actually, but adjacent.
Okay, okay. Awesome, awesome. Well, again, welcome everyone. Really looking forward to having this conversation. But before we dive in, I want to share something that happened to me in the early winter. I was at a conference speaking about digital branding, and afterwards, about 3 or 4 people came up to me saying that they followed me on social media long before they knew about my marketing agency, Digital Delane. And they connected with my content, my perspectives, my overall journey before they explore anything about my business offerings. And this perfectly illustrates what I believe we, should dive into on this podcast. It's essentially how building a personal brand isn't just about self promotion. It creates an authentic pathway that leads people ultimately to your business, and this is where the magic happens, right? Have you guys had any experiences with regard to your personal brand bringing in some potential clients or revenue? I'm sure you guys
Absolutely.
have, right? Yeah, yeah, for sure. Good. Yeah.
I can say that, I think that it's all about the cohesion of it all. And so I think that when your personal brand speaks to who you are, people find that credibility and validity across anything that you're doing. And so that's what I found with the offerings I have. Like people are like, okay, I know what she talks about. I know who she is. So I'm going to trust her when she tells me that this is a service that would work for me, et cetera. That's been my through line of how I feel like people connect with my
Yeah,
personal brand.
I feel that, Ayana. And what about you, Marie?
I couldn't agree more with Ayanna. I think for me, it happened pretty much like that. When I set out to build my first business, London Fashion Today, I didn't really know where I was headed to. I just came fresh from a master degree where I studied how fashion information from Vogue really is redefined through Instagram. So that was back in 2012. And when I positioned as London fashion today, I just, learned as I went and did a lot of things. And in 2023, I launched my consultancy business to help entrepreneurs and creatives. And I didn't really put much effort in marketing that business, but a lot of customers came through the door mostly because they knew London Fashion Today, and it was a brand that they came across as trustworthy. So I think it's so valid what you said, Ayanna. It's really like being cohesive. But what I would add to that is that personality is our compass. And I think it's very, very difficult to distill personality into a marketing strategy, especially when you building your own brand. So I think once you do that successfully, people will resonate truly and meaningfully with whatever you do. That's how I
Yeah.
see it.
No, I agree. And when we think about um, the events that have taken place in the past that have shaped consumer perception about brands, right? Even personal brands, is during the financial meltdown in the US, I think that was what, 2008, where the housing crisis took place. And people, they had the Occupy Wall Street movement, and people really just did not connect with corporations, right? Because they thought they were greedy, so on and so forth. So these corporations had to really hone in on their why. Why are they in business outside of just, profit and loss, right? And that shaped the way brands started to communicate with consumers, and they started to put their CEOs and CMOs at the forefront of their brand to create more of a personal connection with their target audience. And then fast forward, you have, social movements like Black Lives Matter in the US and so on, and these different social issues bubbling up, and organizations started to respond to these social issues like people would, right? And then you have, these CEOs that start to build their own brands, right? And I think when we look at the evolution of how brands have transformed from being very corporate to very personal, it certainly connects with the personal brands that most entrepreneurs are striving to develop. And so what I'm thinking here is we start off this conversation by talking about the foundations of personal branding, right? Recent surveys show that entrepreneurs who intentionally develop their personal brands see up to 30% higher engagement rates than those who focus solely on their business. And for our audience and business owners and entrepreneurs, understanding ultimately how to build this foundation is critical if you want to stand out. So, Marie, as the founder of Power Brand Builder, you help clients build unforgettable brands. What made you decide to develop your own personal brand alongside with your company?
It was mostly aligned with finding my main purpose in life. So I'm a journalist by profession. Spent 20 years in academia, counting high school and everything. And at some point, I just dived into the corporate world here in the UK, which is quite demanding, especially for an expat and a woman. Mostly worked within the financial services industry, which is heavily male dominated. And I always felt that my voice was somehow suppressed by the stigma of not being able to really move forward from a thought leadership point of view, right? I'm always narrating someone else's stories. I don't want my own story here. And I worked positioning CEOs, CMOs, heads, VCs, VPs, mostly males throughout thought leadership. And I thought, hang on a minute, I feel like I'm working towards something on a corporate level, but meaningfully, I'm not really reaching my purpose as an individual. So it was really coming to terms with that and realizing that for me, it's all about generating a positive impact in the world and seeing women and especially women and mothers, but I guess people in general that are really excited about building their own business, but don't really have the tools to start moving the needle towards positioning their brand, or they have a lot of self-doubt and need to unpack the layers of what that really means, really uncover the basics. And it's Power Brand Builder came about in a moment where I was really struggling because I just had my first son, and I was working from home, and I was like, just, keeping that corporate career going, but realizing I'm different, and I have new demands, and I also need to create a vision for the future that is more aligned with my values and who I am as a person. So that's what I try to bring on board with the business, is not only the capacity of learning how to do marketing or developing a brand, be a corporate brand or a personal brand. It's really about putting your soul into what you do and therefore create an impact in the world.
I love that. I love that. So, Ayanna, turning to you now, you described yourself as a Afro-Panamanian New Yorker from Brooklyn who has worked across fashion, tech, and so on. How have these diverse elements of your identity shaped your personal brand?
Thank you for the question. Before I have to, Marie, like you said, so many
Sure.
good points. Purpose, evolution, all of those things come to mind, and I will get to those. But yes, right on, double click. So for me, when it comes, so I feel like when it comes to identity, it's really about embracing all of it. And I think that, growing up, especially depending on where you are, who you are, your environment, sometimes it can feel very alienating when you don't have people who understand or look like you or feel like you and all the things. And so when I was growing up, being Afro-Panamanian was really hard. I didn't even know the term, first of all. And when I was in like communities, I wasn't like Black enough, I wasn't Latina enough. And so I struggled a lot with that. And then when you think about just undervalued like groups, being a woman, I'm also queer. So I just felt like I didn't fit into a lot of different boxes. And then I had a moment where I'm like, why am I trying to fit into a box? I hate boxes. And so I really struggled with trying to find my identity until I was able to realize that I don't need to put myself in the box that this world, especially these corporate companies, want to put you in. I'm a nonconformist. And so it took a lot of exercising for me to get there. But I will say working in corporate environments forced that a lot because similar to what Marie said, oftentimes the only woman of color, the only queer person, there's so many things. And, when you think about code switching and having to like not wear what you want and being too bold or too much, it just got really exhausting. And I was just like, why am I doing this? Who am I doing it for? And so when you start to think about what is your purpose, who are you serving, and what makes you feel good, and how do you show up in the world, I realized that embracing my full identity is so much more important to me than anything else, and really being authentic in how I show up in that. And once I started realizing that and putting that together, it was a game changer. Like, even just walking into those corporate environments, there was a different type of confidence. There was a different type of ownership. And so I will say that it lent a lot to my life, embracing all those identities and my experiences and how I showed up in these different worlds, multiple worlds, where oftentimes you are not wanted, you are not seen. And I really force people to see me. I really force people to hear my voice.
I love that. I love that. It reminds me of a time where, during my first speaking engagement, I was absolutely terrified because I didn't want to say things out of context. I wanted to use the right words. I wanted to make sure that I was position myself as an authority on stage and leveraging my experience, but there are other people in the room that have way more experience than I did, so on and so forth. And so what I thought was, I'm going to make sure that I tell my story because I feel like my story is unique to me and my lens on how I view marketing campaigns or tactics and techniques and approaches is something that someone sitting in their seat could learn from, right? And so I think that our uniqueness is our superpower. And it's gold, and I feel like there are many people that really want to tap into how we view things so that they can further communicate or resonate with their target audience, and so I would recommend anyone struggling to try to figure out how they can leverage their identity to actually get into rooms instead of being blocked by using identity as a blocker for getting into certain rooms. They certainly can understand that their uniqueness is valuable. and they need to share their uniqueness because they have a story, they have a testimony that will certainly help to engage with whatever target audience they're going after.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I felt similarly being on stages and all the things. But my favorite quote that I always like to say is, "You cannot be an imposter in your own experience." And that is such a comforting quote for me before I go on any stage because to your point, your story matters, your experience matters, and there will be someone that connects with it.
Yeah, as long as it's true, there will people that will resonate with that, absolutely. And I think the problem we see these days, especially because everything is mediated by social media, it's like we are not we are mirroring ourselves and mirroring brands from a consumer level, but we are losing part of the basics sometimes. I'm not being negative or apocalyptical here. I'm just saying that this is a trend I mostly seen happening working as a creator with brands. You unpack something, you showcase a product, and that becomes you for years. You repeat that, day by day, and that becomes you. And it comes a point where you question that. Is this really me? This is how I want to position. And I don't think that a lot of people that get into this industry or start building their own personal brand or think about building a business at an early age or early stage really realize that before you actually get to position, you need to unpack who you really are and then kind of get the essence of that and say, okay, this is my brand story. This is how I want the world to see me. So it takes a little of maturity and, unpacking certain things before you actually get to position. So I feel people need to do that more often because otherwise it's just like the same of the same and we are different, right? That's the point of being human. Nobody is the same.
We talked about developing your personal brand, being your authentic self so that your personal brand can shine in many different rooms, if you will. But I want to talk also about how to incorporate a business brand into the personal brand, right? Because I know that's a challenge for many entrepreneurs and so on. Because there's a recent study that found that customers who connect with both a founder's personal brand and their business brand are 3 times more likely to become long-term customers. Yet 65% of business owners still struggle with finding the right balance between personal authenticity and business positioning, right? So this matters tremendously for our listeners who are looking to build cohesive brand experiences. So, Marie, I know your philosophy centers on community building rather than simply buying leads, if you will. So, how does this approach influence both your personal brand and your business brand?
Well, it's basically the backbone of everything I've done so far because I managed a million budgets going into Meta and acquiring really bad quality leads and then going into a CEO board level meeting and not, we're not getting what we really need from this. So it was a formula that had flaws. You can certainly buy leads and sell a product within paid advertising, but I realized that's not sustainable. And it's really important to have the organic element alongside to build consistency and sustainability. So I started experimenting within the corporate scale-up companies I worked with on really trying to understand what the audiences specificities were. And when we look at audiences, some marketers will think, okay, you have this general pool that is demographics, affinities, whatever. So we started to dig deeper into those layers and then creating different customer segments and then driving different communications to those segments and really resonating differently and getting much better ROI from there. So obviously it takes more time. It's a long run game. It's not a short term strategy. But I did feel that that was the way that I wanted to specialize my career on. So obviously leveraging paid organic is important, but I noticed that relationship building, because at the end of the day, customers are becoming more and more discerning. So having that human element, the touch point, the brand touch point across all channels as Ayanna mentioned, but also having someone that cares about the customer individually and listens to what they think or what they would like to in terms of product development, or how do they see themselves fitting in with that specific company and why they're buying into the product. So when I really started to dig into that, that's when I created ROI or in value and ROI for the business I worked with. So based on that formula, I obviously incorporated a lot of these learnings within what I do at Power Brand Builder. But the ultimate goal is really helping people, regardless if they're building a corporate brand from a thought leadership level and need to position themselves as a personal brand as well, or if they are going after the personal brand only. I think it's really important to have a strategy and a method and a short-term and a long-term vision, not only focus on one-time campaigns. The strategic piece, it's so important because sometimes people, they believe they will become famous or they will drive growth for their business if they use a certain social media channel. And it's not like that. I think what we found is that every channel has its own way of communicating. And sometimes for a founder or for someone that is for an entrepreneur, the route that everyone takes might not be the one that they really need to do it. So it's really teaching people to think outside the box and aligning with their core target audience where they really are. And a good example of that is, so currently I work within wealth and asset management here in London. And it's a very funny industry because most of the sales happen offline. Paid advertising doesn't exist in this industry. And a lot of the deals are done by the black book of contacts. So literally it's like they very different from any other type of industry I've worked with. And what really worked is organizing roundtables with CEOs and heads of like really C-suite executives and mediating those conversations and getting them to really position their thoughts, their views. So that was really outstanding. And I think opinion, when it becomes storytelling in a professional positioning way, it's outstanding and it's surely a recipe for success.
For sure. And Ayanna, I know you've worked with major brands like LinkedIn and Meta while also building non-corporate girls, right? It, I'm sure, requires careful brand management between the two, but how do you navigate these spaces authentically when building, working with brands, major brands, as well as your organization?
Yeah. I love the word like care management. I think that was mentioned. I really love that because that's really what it's about. I think that when you think about who you are, we like to say in non-corporate girls, you're 9 to 5. So you're the professional in the corporate world, and then you're 5 to 9, you're the entrepreneur, freelancer, etc. When you think about those things, it's really about the boundaries, right? Like you have to remember that when you walk into a corporate environment, you're building somebody else's dream, right? So if you're going to give that energy 100%, you have to also do that for the dream that you're building for yourself. And so how do you figure out how to do that? And it really does come down to that management piece. So for example, I'm going to a corporate environment, I'm working my 9 to 5. When 5 o'clock comes, I'm now shifting gears. I'm shifting the hat. I am the CEO of this company, and we are now focusing on the 5 to 9 here. Now, we all know as entrepreneurs, you're working 24/7, right? But you still have to have some type of boundary. So maybe it's I'm working 7 days a week. 6 days a week. So including Saturdays in the evening on weekdays for non-corporate. I'm taking that Sunday and I'm off from both roles because I still need to take care of myself. I still need to have that self-awareness and that self-care, but also knowing that there is management that comes with both of these things. And I want to make sure that I'm giving as much percentage as I can and doing the best I can to both things. So I think it's just figuring out how do you manage that? How do you prioritize what happens? And when I think about, I don't like the word balance. I don't think that balance exists. I think I like the word harmony because I feel like at some point in all the things that you do, something will always fall to the wayside. It's impossible for it not to. As someone who's a wife, a mom, a corporate professional, entrepreneur, a freelancer, I have a lot of roles. I can't dedicate 100% to everything at the same time, and that's okay. But when you think about harmony, is really understanding your priorities and understanding that you have to give yourself the grace to do what you can in the moment and then pick the other thing back up when you can. every day, every week, it won't get the same percentage. And so we have to be okay with that. And so that's how I think about how I manage all of my roles, but especially that 9 to 5 of being that corporate person and then building something on the side.
And you talked about harmony, right? And so with harmony with regard to both the personal brand and the professional brand, but at moments you're going to shift to work on one or the other. Um, how do you create harmony within specifically your personal brand, right? In terms of the things that you're doing, what you're accounting for, and so on. And is it the same exact thing that you would be doing for your personal, for your, excuse me, your professional brand?
It's all about priorities, right? So I feel like, so when you think about your professional brand, your corporate world, you already have that set time. Like you already know, you're already going into something, you know exactly what it is. You show up, you do whatever you got to do. When you think about your personal brand, it's easy for those things to fall to the wayside because you don't have like a set, well, you're not, most people don't give themselves a set thing. You should have a set structure of like, this is when I'm going to work on this. But the reality is, when you work in the corporate world, that probably is going to fall to the. You're probably not going to give all of it at the same time. You're not going to give 100% every single day to your side hustle or your brand because you probably don't have it in you to give. So you have to prioritize, and that's what I think about with harmony. I think about I have this list of all these things that are really important to me, and that's great. They should be important to me, but I know that where they are on that list will shift. It'll shift. It's just impossible for it not to. At least in my life, this is my point of view. And so I'm okay with that, knowing that I'm still going to give my time and energy to it when I'm able to and wherever it falls on my list. But it's not a balance. It's more of a harmony of the things I love and what feels true to me and what my passions are, just reordering it every single day, every single week. It's just going to be a little bit different.
Makes sense there. So I want to pivot to talk about content, storytelling, and so on. Research shows that 92% of customers trust recommendations from individuals, even if they don't know them personally, over any brand messaging alone. And this highlights why integrated personal storytelling with business content has become critical. So, for our audience of entrepreneurs and business owners, finding that perfect content mix is both a challenge and an opportunity. So, Marie, your experience lies in translating complex products into compelling brand narratives. So, how would you apply this skill to your own personal brand storytelling?
It's a quite interesting one because I think it's very much more complex to do that when you're talking about yourself and building your own brand than when you're getting a super complex that, let's say, data technology business with 5 different product offers that you need to position, right? I feel like for me has always been about being true to myself, but getting to the point that Ayanna mentioned, and I think that's brilliant, balance versus harmony. During the process, I learned that I need to be that I have to have compassion about myself and to get from A to B. I can't really think about having a to-do list that has 50 things to do. I really need to, prioritize, be smart with my time, but also slow down when I need to. So when I came to build my own business, it was in a point where I wanted a change and I wanted to talk about with aspects of myself that I left under the carpet for years. It's easy to create a inspirational brand because that is about the dream that people have and is often unattainable. For me, creating London fashion today was mostly like that. It was like creating a luxury brand, something unattainable. And it was also unattainable for me because you can't live always reviewing 5-star hotels, right? It has to have an end. You have to have a normal life. And I did, right? But I never shared with my followers in my channel. With Power Brand Builder was different. It was just like making peace with the parts of myself that I never let anybody know existed. And I really want to touch on this point because I think it matters so much for us together here in this podcast, mostly because we come from backgrounds that are not privileged in the positions that we are. And therefore we really had to have a lot of resilience and strength to be where we are. At some point in my life, I realized that as well as being neurodiverse, I had a lot of traumas, like being bullied at school or, wearing thick glasses that really damaged my outlook individually. And those aspects I really turned into a superpower when I created Power Brand Builder. Because when I talk to people, I say, in order to really resonate with whatever your purpose is in your personal brand or in your business brand, you're gonna have to put something that what makes you unique. And sometimes what makes you unique is not the pretty edited picture of the flawless picture that you post on Instagram. Is the nitty gritty. Is perhaps for me the thick glasses or my neurodiversity that sometimes I feel, should I share it? Should I not? Because some people think that having HD is just like being crazy, And I found out that being vulnerable and positioning those aspects of me throughout my community shifted the narrative completely. And I felt more honest with myself. I don't suffer of imposter syndrome anymore because I kind of brought the narrative into London Fashion Today and changed the positioning in a sense that I don't need that validation. I don't need to measure myself based on which 5-star hotel I'm reviewing or which PR invite I received. So I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. This next question is open to anyone, but I feel like there are going to be some listeners who are having problems focusing on the amount of vulnerability they should have in their personal brand and connecting that with their professional or business brand. Would you have any guidance or advice on the level of depth with regard to vulnerability they should have and how that can possibly translate or not to their personal brand? What's your opinion?
Yeah. Marie, I loved everything that you said and I agree. I felt very similarly. And kind of going to your question, I feel like when you think about, I feel like in order to be authentic and to show up, especially in your content in the way you would like, you have to have a level of vulnerability. It's just what it is, right? And so I think when you think about vulnerability, one is an exercise mechanism. I think that we're not taught to be vulnerable. And so we're not going to come through and anything we do with that lens until we learn how to do it. And I think that as we evolve as humans, we're constantly exercising the level of vulnerability we would like to share. So that's my lens on it. And so when you think about content as you're being your own personal brand, you have to figure out what that level is for yourself. And you also have to figure out when you come to having that through line with your business, how are you going to tie that in? What exactly are you going to say that you feel comfortable with? What exactly are you going to say that resonates with your audience in the way that you would like, etc.? A good example I can share is for non-corporate girl. Well, me and my co-founder, we're always talking about our experiences and stuff because we consider our podcast a digital diary in real time. So we literally have to be vulnerable. It's like we're trying to have people relate to us and build a community. But we could talk a lot about our personal experiences and healing through that often. And so that could come out in the newsletter, right? And if it's coming out in the newsletter and it's topical, I'm probably going to share an experience that I had that people can relate to about the topic because that connects and that makes sense. It's also a healing moment for me anytime I am vulnerable because kind of similar to Maria, it reminds me of like, oh, I got through this. Like this was something that was maybe a negative or seen as something that I was depressed or down about. And now I'm using it kind of as a superpower and I'm being able to heal through it and also help my community do that. But it comes to, I personally think it comes to the level of vulnerability that you are willing to share at any given point because we're going to constantly evolve and we're going to constantly learn through that. And we have to exercise that muscle. It's not something that just happens for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I also think it also depends of who are you talking to, what's your brand about, and who is your audience, right? So I feel comfortable on being vulnerable because I'm targeting people that I have similar pain points, right? But let's say I was founding a AI data-driven company targeting middle-aged males. I don't think they would be interested in my vulnerabilities. Therefore, I think it's a balance between um, tuning in with the expectation and the lifestyle, the affinities, and the problem of the target audience in narrative control. Even though I'm vulnerable, I have control over the narrative and I position in a way that I feel comfortable, but it's also that I know that that audience will receive well. Um, and obviously being strategic. So if you look at marketing calendar here in the UK, we have so many initiatives throughout the year that are about mental health, for example, or equality. So I really use those special dates to really position throughout my personal brand. And I think when you think strategy and you think long term and you have like not one time marketing campaigns but something ongoing, then you can really shape the narrative in your favor, right? And using your vulnerabilities or not.
And we talked about how, obviously, to develop your personal brand, navigating the challenges of connecting it with your professional brand. But let's now move forward to talking about measuring the success of your personal branding efforts. And this is open to anyone, what common mistakes do you see entrepreneurs making while trying to build their personal brand alongside their business?
So I would say when I think about the mistakes, I would think about first, I feel like entrepreneurs forget that they're their own brand first, right? And so I think that when you're thinking about a business, you're just showing your business and there's no face behind it, as we talked about before. That is a mistake because people need to know who you are. And if your business were to go away, God forbid, all the things, who are you and how is that showing up? So I feel like that's one common mistake. The other thing is, I think going back to a little bit to the content, right? Making sure that you have, I like the way you phrase it of narrative control, making sure that you have that and you're very intentional and strategic about how you're talking about your brands, right? Your personal and your business, whether the through lines, but also whether the separations and how you're talking to that. Because when you're thinking about measuring impact, if you aren't being strategic enough with it, you are going to lose people, right? You're going to lose your audience. You're going to lose that service, that client, that ROI that you're trying to get. So I think you need to be very intentional about what that looks like, but it is a mix. I think it is a mix of figuring out the right measurements for what you're doing. So I would say to me, those are the two things that come to mind when I think about entrepreneurs and how they're, what that misses could be.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest mistake is really throwing marketing budget in the dark without knowing exactly what you're doing. So paying loads to press and PR features without measuring ROI, or doing paid advertising on Instagram and LinkedIn without measuring ROI. Also being insecure about themselves and delegating strategic positioning of the business to other people. I think especially on an early stage, if you're interested in developing your brand alongside the business, you really have to be the face of the business. Or if you don't want to be the face of the business, then choose someone that will be, and therefore you can develop their personal brand, right? Because there's a lot of people that don't want to be the face of their brands. Although I think you don't need necessarily to be the face, but you can steal your story into the brand narrative. And I give an example of one of my clients. She was building a vegan skincare brand, and she is an expat in London. And there are so many skincare brands coming up all the time. So it's like, what is your main USP? How are you going to differentiate your brand? Why would I buy into a product? And she's like, what are you passionate about? And she was like, yeah, the reason why I want to do this is because when growing up, my grandma had this amazing garden. She's from Czech Republic, and she was saying my grandma had this amazing garden, and she was so careful about her plants and herbs. And I grew up smelling those flowers and herbs, and that was just printed in my mind. And at some point, I realized that I wanted to replicate that into something that everyone can have access to. And I thought, this is brilliant. This is your brand story. Why you didn't think that before? So it's like, this is why I always say is like, even if sometimes it's not about developing literally the messaging for the personal brand, it might be, a story that is in the back burner that people are not consciously thinking about. That is the hook. So it's important to be open and also vulnerable rather than not, I think.
Yeah.
And I love that you said that too, because it goes back to what's your purpose and your why of why you're even doing this. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? And I think when you think about how do you connect the story to the brand, it's really about that relatability. So I love that you shared that example because it's like, why would people want to do this? And there's so many brands out there that have this personal story rooted in why they even started the business to begin with.
Yeah, and if
Yeah.
we look at the most successful brands worldwide, they had a very strong why. So I think it's not because there are enough successful brands out there that someone would stop doing their own brand or their business just because there are others. Because people they will consume multiple things, right? So it's really about tuning in with the right like-minded people.
And Maria, I like what you mentioned earlier about, growing your personal brand isn't just about, you know, paying these large retainer fees to publicists without tracking ROI or providing attribution or boosting posts, so on and so forth. I mean, if you're trying to connect your personal brand with your professional brand, you have to track ROI for both, right? Because you're certainly tracking ROI, I'm sure, for your professional brand or your business brand, and so that's critically important there. And I think on our end for our team at Digital Delane, for me personally, I have my executive assistant track KPIs across the board for all of my personal branding activities, whether that is, a KPI for speaking engagements, publicity activations, whether that's, a write up in a magazine or news outlet, also, the impressions of the content that I'm creating, so on and so forth, right? So I think, for any entrepreneur, brand leader out there who is working on building their personal brand, they can certainly create a spreadsheet that tracks these specific KPIs, set a frequency when you're reviewing these KPIs so that you can make sure that you're continuing to grow your personal brand, because ultimately, as that personal brand growth starts to increase, you should start to see more of an increase in your business brand as well. So I would certainly recommend all the listeners doing that. All right. So we talked a lot about juggling the personal and professional brands. We talked about having, several different brands that we're representing, that we've worked with, so on and so forth. But I'm wondering, how do you tie in the history of what you've done for other brands into your professional or business brand in a way that also would not limit or pigeonhole yourself into one specific industry or niche, if you're in particular trying to get outside of trying to pivot into a new direction or a new industry. Would you have any advice for someone that's looking to do that if they had this historical personal brand focusing on one industry or occupation and they want to pivot and shift? What recommendations or guidance or advice would you give?
This is one of my favorite questions. Your transferable skills are your gold. So I will say that first and foremost. A lot of people, especially when you think about changing industries, they think that, oh, because I have skill sets here, I'm not able to actually do this over here because where's the connection?
Mm.
That's your connection, those transferable skills, because you can do that in any environment as long as you sell that for yourself. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we've talked a lot about this, your purpose, your why. Like it is so, I know a lot of us struggle sometimes with figuring out what our actual purpose is. For those of us who have found it, that's great. But what I will say is when you think about your professional brand and your personal brand, or however you want to mix it, there is a through line. There's a through line to who you are as a person and your why and your purpose that kind of connects the two. And you need to figure out what that looks like. So it does take some self auditing, it takes some work, takes some self work. But once you figure out that through line, you're able to create a brand narrative that works for you and who you are. And you can take that anywhere, whether you're taking it into a role, an industry, and a venture, whatever that looks like, you can actually connect that for yourself. But you just need to figure out what that looks like. You are not your job, you are not your role, and you are also not your business. You are you. And so you need to figure out how do you connect what that purpose, that impact is for yourself, and then that will shine through. So that's what I tell my clients, and that's how I navigate my life.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's another element as well that I'd like to touch, and it's being lean. And I love growing startups taught me think lean, which means you consistently testing different approaches rather than assuming something is right or wrong, right? And I think there's a cultural element as well, which is in America, you study to be something and you work most of your years to. Here in the UK, especially in London, it's slightly different. I see like people having bachelor degrees in geography and working in finance or cybersecurity or luxury goods. So it's really different culturally, and I think that it was helped me pivot into an industry I never thought I would work in before. Obviously, I did communications, I did journalism, I worked with digital media and luxury goods and fashion journalism. How did I end up working in wealth management? It's just like. So I think the thread that you mentioned, it's so valuable as well, because when you realize what's your main USP, what are you passionate about, and what is the one thing that you do well, that is going to be the transferable skill that you're going to use regardless of the industry you're working in, right? And I saw a TED talk that just stuck with me somehow because, I have ADHD brain, which means my brain is thinking about so many things at the same time, and I want to try new things and I want to explore, and learn. And this person said the following. Shame I don't remember her name because it would be a great quote, but she said, "Don't focus your time trying to learn something you're not good at. Focus on doing what you excel." Because that's a no-brainer, right? And focus in becoming even better in what you already excel. So I think that's the transferable skill you just mentioned, Ayanna.
Yeah, and that's right. I mean, we talked about earlier on your uniqueness being your superpower, right? But I certainly also think that self-awareness is a superpower as well, right? So doubling down on the things, to your point, Marie, that you excel in or you do well or that lights you up is certainly something that would yield bigger and better results overall, right? All right, so now it's time for one of my favorite segments of the show, Bad, Bold, and Brilliant. And this is where we examine some interesting personal brand examples and then discuss what we can learn from them. Sound good? All right. So let's start off with Gary Vaynerchuk's approach to content. So he tackled the challenge of building a personal brand by documenting rather than creating, turning everyday business moments into content through his Daily V series. And this created an authentic, behind the scenes look at entrepreneurship that spread organically. So I'm curious, how would you categorize this approach as bad, bold, or brilliant?
I would personally say brilliant because I operate in the same way. And when you think about a content creation hack, it's really like leveraging your content from those everyday conversations. And so the fact that he's able to build all of that just based on his everyday skill set and what he's doing, I think is great. It resonates. It's good. You know what I mean? And he's also being authentic because he's leaning into what he knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I agree as well. I think was talking before the show here how one of the reasons why I created the Brand Behavior podcast is because of the conversations that I have at roundtable lunchtime discussions. And so as a hack, I could have these discussions through a podcast and develop amazing relationship with individuals like you, Ayanna and Marie, right? And so it helps to multiply yourself and your time and repurpose some of the content that you're creating by simply recording, in this case, your journey of meeting amazing people, right? So yeah, I would say it's brilliant as well. All right, so next up we have Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx. So she responded to traditional corporate expectations by maintaining an approachable, authentic personal brand, even as her company grew to billion-dollar status. And she regularly shares candid stories of failures, personal moments, and behind-the-scene glimpses that humanize her as a founder. So what's your take on this one? Bad, bold, or brilliant?
I think it's really bold. if you got it from that level of revenue, you surely know one thing that you do well and that led you to do that. But having the openness to accept the failures and share the failures, it's something truly bold.
Yeah.
People normally like to talk about the successful story, not necessarily about the trials. But I like Steve Jobs on that approach because it's all about the trials, right? You don't get to perfect a product from night to day. You test and you learn and you change and then you evolve and become, the product. But it takes time and effort. So it's very bold for her to open up like that.
I agree, that human aspect, that human element, right? That's what it's about, how you're connecting with your audience. That's like the ultimate connection because people are going to see everything that she's doing from the successes to the failures, and it gives them permission as well to want to share, to want to build, to want to create something and still hold true to who they are and what they've learned and what they're learning. So I do think it's bold as well.
And it shifts the narrative that success is all about winning. And I think in America, this is so, so strong. And it has to, as you said, you are a non-conformist, Ayanna. That narrative has to change, right?
Yeah.
It's all about, when you lose, you win as well. Because, you know,
Yeah, I don't even believe in losing. I believe in lessons. Everything,
exactly. Yeah.
especially being an entrepreneur, I'm sure we all can agree, like every failure that I've had has been a lesson. And we've learned to pivot and just do better. And so I'm grateful for that, you know?
Wonderful.
All right.
Can relate.
And finally, let's look at Elon Musk's personal
Hmm.
branding. So he's built a massive following by sharing his unfiltered thoughts on everything from his companies to global issues, often stirring controversy that ultimately impacts Tesla and his other ventures. His personal brand has become inseparable from these companies in many ways. Would you classify this strategy as bad, bold, or brilliant?
I think it's bad. I think his strategy is bad. I think he lost the control of the narrative. I think he is a very complex and very smart individual. And I don't think he cares too much about what people think about him. And I don't think he followed his strategy at all. I think he just did something that sounds very chaotic to me.
What about
I,
you, Ayanna?
I mean,
Yeah,
if Elon Musk is listening to this, probably, I don't know, but he's not gonna care. It's like,
he might.
I think I don't know. As far as I learned from the narratives we've seen online, it was all about building the vision for the products that he has, and so I guess being a ally of Trump has really impacted Tesla in a bad way. So in that sense, like going out of the tangent from the personal brand to the business brand, it became clearly that not having a strategy for his personal brand impacted negatively his business.
said.
Yeah, we certainly, like to your point, have seen the Tesla stock go down, the market react to some of the unfiltered things that he mentions on social networks and so on. He certainly has the attention of people, and I think that he has not accounted for the backlash that could take place. And I believe there's stories about him, you know, company may find, or his companies are maybe finding a replacement as CEO, so on and so forth. These are all just rumors, but I certainly think that is a topic of conversation for some of the board members for sure. And so this is really where I think it's more about the people in the market more so than the individual, because nowadays people are starting to put their money where their beliefs is. And I think that is really impacting his company. And so this is a classic case study of how you can use a personal brand to build businesses as he did in the beginning. And also that personal brand could be a detriment at the same time. So there is a balance, or excuse me, there's a harmony between the two. All right. Well, listen, we'll go ahead and
Yeah,
end with
absolutely.
that. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Ayanna, for sharing such valuable insights today. And so, just to recap some key takeaways, we talked about finding your authentic voice, strategically integrating your personal brand with your business identity, creating content that serves both brands, and measuring success while navigating these challenges. So before we go, I want you all to let everyone know where they can find you if they want to contact you, what are your offerings, and so on. So, Marie, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Sure, yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Marie Weidlich, or on my website, Power Brand Builder. And what we do is basically a 5 consultancy session, which I called the Power Brand Builder Toolkit. It's face to face with me, and it's a 1-to-1. So it's very, very exclusive. And the main goal is unlocking your brand power.
And what about you, Ayanna?
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Ayanna Dutton-Diaz, on all social platforms at _Aya_brand. You can follow Non-Corporate Girls at Non-Corporate Girls on all platforms. You can check out our podcast on all streaming platforms. You can visit our website, noncorporategirls.com. And for any offerings from my consultancy, you can just visit my website. I'm always open for a discovery or chemistry call to really figure out how we can help you tap into your why and get your brand narrative to something that serves you and gives you purpose.
Awesome. And I am Juntae DeLane, founder at Digital DeLane, a full service digital marketing agency helping to bring new brands, campaigns, and ideas to life. Thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode of The Brand Behavior. We hope you've gained valuable insights into how to build a personal brand alongside your business brand. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platforms and visit our website at digitaldelane.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and, of course, share it with your network. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.